Hello and welcome to this, our second workshop for Flock to Marion on what we've called the medium birds. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, and I am actually sitting out in the Karoo at the moment, near Middelburg in the Eastern Cape, so I hope my internet will hold, so please forgive me any technical issues. So as I mentioned, we're focusing on what we've called the medium-sized birds, the petrels, shearwaters, skuas, and jaegers. They aren't quite as difficult as the very small birds that we covered last week, but they can still pose quite the challenge to identify. So luckily tonight we have Vince Ward joining us. Vince was born and raised in Cape Town, and he started his career with the Western Cape Nature Conservation, studying coastal seabirds on South Africa's offshore islands. He's birded on 4 continents, the highlights of which being the summer survey to Marion Island, of which I'm very jealous, and the scale voyage to Antarctica in the winter of 2019. Vince also has the distinction of being the 3rd birder to see over 800 species in South Africa. He is currently a tour leader for Birding Africa and Cape Town Pelagics, and conducts tours around South Africa. He is also joining us on Flock to Marion, having been on the 2022 Flock to Marion. So we're very happy to have you back, Vince. So just a couple of words quickly about Birding Africa. They are Birding Africa and Cape Town Pelagics are linked organizations, and they will be sending a guiding team on Flock to Marion. And they have been around for 27 years organizing bird tours to find special birds around Cape Town and all the way across Africa, from South Africa to Uganda. And they are the only tour company specializing in Africa-wide birding tours. And Cape Town Pelagics actually donates all of its profits to conservation, particularly albatross conservation, and BirdLife International's albatross program. So we're very grateful to them for supporting conservation, and also for coming on Flock to Marion and sharing their expertise. So without further ado, I will let Vince start sharing his screen. Just to remind everyone, if you have any questions for him, please do put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat feed, and that way we can more easily track them and answer them at the end of the presentation. So Vince, yeah, please do start sharing your screen and start your presentation. Oh, and I've just seen a message coming in the chat from Martin saying, will you record and put this presentation online as I did with the previous one? Yes, absolutely, I will. And I will send the link to the recording to all the participants so that you are able to rewatch it and pause and, you know, go back in your own time. So I will make sure that every registered participant gets the link. But I think that will only get to you on Monday next week, as I'm actually on leave at the moment. That's why I'm in the Karoo, and so I'll be out of the office for the next couple of days, but I will send the link on Monday. Okay, without any further ado, Vince, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everyone. For those of you who are in South Africa, people all around the world, a friend of mine, Barbara, in the US, is tuning in, so we've got a global audience. So, like Christina said, firstly, thank you, Christina. Yeah, I started my career in coastal seabirds on the offshore islands of South Africa, and getting to those islands usually involved jumping on rickety fishing boats, heading out to these islands in sometimes the worst of weathers. And it was my very first trip out to Dasson Island, where I was working on African penguins at the time, that I came across my first tube nose, my first medium-sized bird, white-chinned petrel, and just watching this absolutely amazing bird keeping track with our fishing boat as it was speeding away from Azefontein Harbour and towards Dasson Island. I was absolutely mesmerized by this bird that was keeping track without moving its wings at all. Like Christina said as well, I've been fortunate to actually step foot on Marion Island in 2001. Spent a little over 2 weeks on the island helping to count all of the surface nesting birds. Uh, in 2019, I also managed to get down to Antarctica as well, sort of adding to my knowledge base on these medium birds, and currently tour leader for Birding Africa at Cape Town Pelagics. Uh, and hope to see everybody on the 2025 trip, where it'll be my second time as a guide. So I'm just going to quickly go through how I'm going to run the workshop so everybody's got an idea of what's to come. So the first part will deal with the medium-sized noses, the petrels and the shearwaters. Part two will just deal with the four skuas slash jaegers that we are likely to encounter or can probably encounter. Um, I'd like to sort of everybody to see the workshop that I'm doing as sort of an introductory broad brush approach to these. Uh, if we really want to get into detail about a lot of these birds, we probably would need several hours. So see this as a starting point where you can get a good foundation for what's to come on Flock, if you want to do any self-study with any of the resources coming out as well. So just bear in mind this isn't going to be as exhaustive as it possibly can be. What I will do when it comes to the ID, I will deal with three main features. So firstly, the obvious image features, any ID features, bill, leg color, that'd be useful. I will also touch on jizz, which is the general impression of size and shape. So what's the feel that you get for a bird that's flying by, and then where appropriate, we'll deal with flight pattern as well. You'll especially see when we come to petrels and shearwaters, they do fly in slightly different ways. I know John has just sent out the brand new species list. So what I'm going to do, or what I have done is every time I deal with a species, the likelihood code of us getting the bird will be in the margin, as will the current IUCN conservation status. And then I've just also included whether the bird is a Marion Island, Prince Edward Island breeder with a star, just so that you get an idea of what is around the island, what we are likely to get, and what you're likely to or what you can concentrate on when you are doing self-study just before flock. Um, a lot of information in this talk. I'll be very much obviously Peter Ryan's published by Straight Nature. This is one of my personal favorites at the moment, the Oceanic Birds of the World photo guide. And get your hands on that, always worth having. Obviously, Peter Harrison and co. His brand new guide is, I think, set the benchmark at the moment. We are quite lucky to have Peter on the boat. So bring your copy along to get signed if you didn't do so on the previous flock. First, I want to get all the thanks out the way, so we don't have to rush through that at the end. This has been very much a team effort. So the whole team at BirdLife South Africa, including getting the flock out to Marion again. I'd like to thank my colleagues at Cape Town Pelagics and they kindly allowed me out of the Sassel 5. And also thanks to Peter Ryan and Susan Miller at the Fitzpatrick at the University of Cape Town. I'm not the world's greatest photographer, so I've had to rely quite heavily on these fabulous people who have supplied amazing photographs and had a look through the talk and provided some valuable input. Thanks to everyone, and also a huge thanks to everyone attending. The sort of fees that you're paying towards us are going towards vital conservation work on the now critically endangered African penguin. So thanks to all of you. And with all of the housekeeping out the way, let's actually get into the birds. So, first part of the talk, petrels and shearwaters. So they belong to the family of the Procellariidae. It's a diverse family. Uh, And for me, the thing that marks this family is this extreme size range. So you get everything from the mollymawk-sized giant petrels, which Trevor will deal with next week in workshop 3. So here we have a giant petrel against black-browed albatross. And then the smaller or the other size extreme, but everything that Dan dealt with last week, so admirably. And this week's I'll be dealing with the 19 medium-sized species that are on the list. And then the 4 jaegers will come up in part, or 4 jaegers and skuas will come up in part 2. So if you do any biology courses, they talk about form follows function. So petrels and shearwaters tend to fly in slightly different ways. So petrels tend to fall on the dynamic soaring side. So do yourself a favor, Google dynamic soaring at some point. It's an absolutely fascinating way of moving, versus shearwaters, which spend a lot of time essentially flying underwater when it comes to feeding. So that has sort of led to them having a very specific body shape, which I'll get onto. But again, in broad brush terms, the petrels tend to be quite compact, quite bulky birds, if you want to think of it like that. Stout to very robust bills. Like I said earlier, they are mostly optimized for this dynamic soaring, and some of the petrels can be highly aerial. So especially the pterodromas, also known as the gadfly petrels, which can go from the sea surface up to several stories. When I was on the SA Agalis 2 down to Antarctica, we were watching Kerguelen petrels, one of the species I'll touch on, go from the sea surface up to maybe 7, 8 stories in a matter of seconds, hang there at the top of that arc for a few seconds, and then dip back down. And they can cover thousands of kilometers using that sort of highly aerial form of flight. So moving on to the shearwaters. So I like to think of the shearwaters being more pointy, more sharp-ended. For most of the birds, at least 3 of the points of the bird. So the wingtips, the bill tend to be quite sharp and pointy. What happens on the tail can be quite variable. Like this little sooty shearwater that is skimming the water surface, they tend to be quite thin-billed and not as robust in the petrels. They're usually marked by some rapid wing beats and are very close, they fly very close to the sea surface, which is where shearwaters get their name. On a lot of the pelagics that we conduct out of Cape Town, we see a lot of sooty shearwaters, and they will fly so close to the water surface that when they bank and turn, one of their wingtips will actually slice or shear the sea surface. And this combination of rapid wing beats, this very, very close to the water surface flights, you can think of as the shearwater flight pattern, which will separate it from the petrels, which have that more dynamic to arcing flight pattern. What I've done with the birds, we've got a variety of plumage patterns, and I've clustered everything into two groups. So firstly, we'll deal with the all dark tube noses. If you haven't heard the term tube nose before, we're talking about the procellariforms. They have a little sheath that runs over the nostrils, and that has some interesting functions as well, which I won't get into now, but well worth a Google. And then the second group, I will deal with the pied or two-tone tube noses, which will grade on a spectrum from being very dark above to a light gray above. So here's the sort of first cluster of the all dark petrels. So I'll deal with petrels and shearwaters together. There's no real point trying to uh, deal with the dark petrels in one group and the dark shearwaters. So what I've done is I've clustered everything. So you can see we can take all of the all dark birds, so dark above, dark below, and we can separate them into two groups. Those which have light colored bills, so white-chinned spectacled petrels, the flesh-footed shearwater, and those that are all dark and are dark billed, so great winged petrel, sooty shearwater, and Kerguelen petrel. So let's start with our first bird. So white-chinned petrel, we can kind of think of it as the standard petrel off Southern Africa. Anybody who has done any sea watching, done any small boat pelagics, probably one of the first birds that you will encounter as you leave the coast are these beautiful white-chinned petrels. So that they're marked by leisurely flight with frequent glides, and then as the wind speed starts to pick up, their flight pattern changes, and they start to transition into that arching flight, like I described with the Kerguelen petrel. So what are we going to look for on white-chinned petrels? So the chin after which the bird is named is actually quite highly variable, and they've got this beautiful straw-colored bill with a straw-colored nail. So again, if anybody hasn't encountered the term nail before, it is that little plate on the tip of this white-chinned petrel. So that little upper plate at the top is known as the nail. Just how variable can the white-chin and white-chin petrel be? So this is a spectrum of birds that I photographed on various trips, going from the bird in the upper left-hand corner, which has hardly any white on the white-chin, through the whole spectrum to the bird on the bottom right, which is vaguely starting to look like our next bird, which is spectacle petrel. The spectacles after which the bird is named can be highly variable, but the one feature that these birds will always have in terms of plumage is some white on the forehead, and then they have a dark nail. The species were previously considered to be subspecies, at least when I started birding, and locally around the islands in which they breed, they're known as ring eyes because of those conspicuous spectacles. Again, we can look at how variable the facial pattern is. But like I said, the one feature that is always there is going to be some white on the forehead and some black on the nail. Moving on from the two petrels, we can get into the shearwaters. So here we have flesh-footed shearwater. The feeling you'll get with these flesh-footed shearwaters is that they basically look and behave and fly like a very slim build, very lightly built petrel. You can see the very light built structure on this particular bird, very ably photographed by Dom Rollinson of Birding Eco Tours. look at the bird from the side, you can see where it gets its name from. So it has both these flesh-colored legs and feet and flesh-colored bill. So the bird will be sort of pink at both ends if you want to think of it that way. And from that, we'll move on to the all dark birds. So birds that are dark below, dark above, and dark billed. So great winged petrels will be one of the species that will be quite common once we are out in the open ocean and once we start approaching Marion and the Prince Edwards. So being in the genus Pterodroma, it's probably what I consider to be the most typical of the gadfly petrels, barring maybe soft plumage, which we'll get to a little later in the talk. It tends to have a slightly more leisurely gadfly flight, and by gadfly flight, I mean this sort of very high looping, arcing flight that I spoke about earlier. The main sort of hard part feature on these great wings are this very heavy bill that again you can see in Dom's fantastic photograph. And the one thing I tend to notice about these great wings is when they fly, they tend to sort of look like they are holding the bill slightly down as they're flying, as opposed to straight forward like some of the other petrels and shearwaters we'll come to. Uh, Another good feature to look at is the great winged petrels normally hold that wrist at quite a sharp angle, particularly once they really get going in that looping flight. They're not as straight winged as something like a white-chinned petrel or some of the shearwaters. And again, in this fantastic photograph, you can see that very heavy, all dark bill, almost vaguely recalling a skuas bill. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in terms of build, is we have sooty shearwater. It has that very typical shearwater flight pattern that I touched on. The main feature on sooty shearwaters is the diagnostic silvery underwing. That silvery underwing shows quite well, especially in the early morning light and when the birds are looping like that. On our small boat pelagics out of Cape Town, we'll get the shearwaters flying very close to the water, and from a distance, that rapid wing beat that the sooties do uh, will expose and then cover that silvery underwing in this sort of rhythmic flashing. So you'll see these black little birds shooting by with a sort of flashing silver as they go along, which helps to separate them from things like white-chinned petrels at a distance, where they don't have that rapid shearwater wing beat, and they don't have that nice flash as they go by. Uh, One of the other used to be within the Pterodroma. One of the other typical or used to be a gadfly petrel is Kerguelen petrel, known as a Kurgi by those in the know. Uh, the you can see on this bird, it's got that very characteristic bull-necked appearance. So by bull-necked, I mean the bird doesn't have a sort of narrowing of the neck between the head and the shoulders and the body. It's quite stark, quite muscular, or muscular in appearance, recalling the structure of a bull. And overall, these Kurgis tend to be quite a compact little petrel. The other nice feature, which shows quite nicely in the plates done by Fancy that appear in Sassel 5, are these silvery highlights on the leading edge. So if we actually go back to the previous picture, Peter Ryan's picture, you can see those the silvery leading edges, almost uh, like the landing lights on a booted eagle for those who know booted eagles well. Moving on from Kerguelen petrel. So we've dealt with the all darks. So let's deal with the pied, the two tones, and to try and make life a little bit easier, I've separated them into three groups. So we have those that are dark above. We have those which are some sort of shade of brown above, and then we have those which are sort of silvery blue gray above. And if you take all of the birds on your checklist and you separate them out, this is how they come out. So let's get these little guys out the way. So these can be the LBJs of the small tube nose world. So the three shearwaters we are likely to encounter will be little, manx, and subantarctic. In terms of the way they're going to be flying and moving, very low on the water, like shearwaters are like shearwaters fly. The flight is very rapid, fluttery, quite frantic in little and subantarctic, whereas Manx tends to have glides interspersed with flapping, and those can be fairly good features in calmish conditions. Once the wind gets going, then things tend to change. But my advice for anyone trying to tackle these is kind of like with the prions, photograph, 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 get into a huddle, look at those back of cameras, and try work them from there. So what we can do in terms of once you have those back of the camera pictures is we can look so firstly, sort of out in the field, subantarctic and little tend to be smaller than the larger Manx shearwater. But in terms of upper parts, subantarctic shearwater tends to have the silvery blue cast above, whereas little and Manx tend to be a lot darker above. And another way that we can separate them is we can look at the underside. Little and subantarctic have a thin trailing edge. You can see it quite nicely in these pictures, whereas Manx, the larger Manx shearwater, will have a much thicker trailing edge. If we get some really good pictures, we can look at the facial pattern. Little shearwater tends to have this very open, quite pale face, which from a distance will kind of give the bird a very light-colored look to the head, whereas subantarctic and Manx tend to have much darker faces. That dark face is solid in subantarctic shearwater, and there is that little C-shaped crescent in Manx shearwater. Once we've got the LBJs out the way, let's deal with the next one down, or the next group down in terms of coloring. So the brown and white petrels and shearwaters. And we can do a further subdivision once we know the color of the upper side. So we have Atlantic petrel, which has a dark underwing. And then we have Pintado, also known as Cape petrel, great shearwater, and Corey shearwater, all with white underwing. So let's deal with Atlantic first. We probably are not likely to see the species, but I'm going to touch on it anyway. Being a pterodroma, again, a typical gadfly petrel, has a very distinct white square on the chest. You can see the heavy bill on this photograph taken by Peter Ryan. And the dark underwing shows really well, contrasts really nice with the white chest and belly. So we'll move on to species we are more likely to see. So the first one is Pintado or Cape petrel. It's unmistakable. It's one of these birds you're not going to confuse it with anything else. in particular that checkerboard pattern on the upper surfaces. Moving on. So one of the features to look at if we ever get close to these pintados is they have, I'll quickly go back to the previous slide. You got the big white window on the wing, and when you see the bird from underneath, if you look at the top of that picture, that white on the upper side actually allows some white or light allows sunlight to actually penetrate through the wing, and you can actually sort of see the white on the upper side showing through on the underside when you get good views like this. The other thing we're going to look for on these pintados is the black hood. And let's quickly go back. A good little bit of pub quiz trivia. The genus name of pintado, Daptian or Daptian, I've never actually heard it pronounced, doesn't actually mean anything. It's has no deep Greek or Latin roots. All it is a anagram of the word pintado. So store that away and use it in a bird pub quiz at some point. This beautiful plate from Sassel 5, again showing that beautiful white translucent panel, showing the beautiful white through the windows. And just in case anybody isn't familiar with the term window, it's these large white panels in the wings. I will get into windows in a big way when we come to the shearwater, the skuas and jaegers towards the end of the talk. The next bird in the brown above, white below is Corey shearwater. So a very typical shearwater jizz, sort of very sharp, sort of sharp build, tends to have a more relaxed, slow flight. The main features we're going to be looking for on Corey shearwater is the scaled mottled upper points with a striking yellow bill. There are going to be very few birds around that are going to have that like literally banana yellow bill out at sea. So a good feature to look for. We look at the upper parts earlier. So the mottled upper parts. Another important feature is the lack of a collar, and like I said, that striking yellow bill is going to get you to Corey shearwater quite quickly. And for those who are sort of following along at home, I'm not going to sort of touch on Scopoles. Scopoles hasn't yet been sort of properly confirmed or well understood in South African waters, even though they probably do occur in smaller numbers. So for now, we will consider all of the Cories type shearwaters we're going to be getting to be true Cories. Again, enough optics on the boat, we can get some photographs and see if we can tease out any very errant Scopoles. Just a quick look at the underside. Those white underwing coverts is putting this in that grouping or my own little grouping of brown above, white below. The next shearwater we're going to touch on is great shearwater. Again, another very typical shearwater, very direct flight, rapid wing beats. It has a pale color that separates the head from the back, so it gives it a capped appearance. And as with Corey shearwater, our previous bird, very mottled scaled upper parts, which are typical of some of these shearwaters. So here we got great shearwater skimming quite close to the surface. We can see those mottled scaled upper parts and the dark cap being separated by the pale color. From the underside, that dark captures quite well. They have a belly patch, which can be quite variable, and then they've got these scaled coverts underneath that gives the great, quite a unique appearance. So having dealt with all of that, let's get into the gray and white tube noses. So again, I've separated them on what's happening on the underwing. So we have those with a dark underwing, gray petrel, soft plumage, and white-headed. And we have those with white underwings, barrows, and southern filmer. Let's move on to gray petrel. This is a breeder on Marion. So despite having the word petrel in the name, it recalls a very large grey shearwater, potentially to be confused with Cory shearwater. The bill isn't as striking as that in Cory's, and Cory's tends to be more epipelagic as opposed to a true deep pelagic species. So we should be able to separate the two out just on distribution. Have a look at the upper sides. We got some gray scaling coming in, like on the two shearwaters I touched on. Got that yellow bill there as well. Look at the undersides. That dark underwing will help us settle on any ID, and it's got a pure white belly, which will separate us from maybe something like a great shearwater buzzing by. Again, just have a look at that bill, not that banana milkshake yellow bill that we get in Cory's. Soft plumage or softies for those in the know. Like I said earlier, with great wing petrel, this is probably what I consider to be the consummate soft gadfly petrel. The sort of rapid, highly erratic flight with sometimes very deep wing beats. The main feature we want to look for on this bird, again, ignoring some of the other potentially confusing species that do occur in the Atlantic that are probably not going to be on our radars unless we see something completely unexpected. The main features we want to look for on this bird is that complete collar, which separates the white breast and belly from the white chin. On the upper side, the soft plumes have the softies have this really nice faint M. Use a bit of imagination, go from one wingtip to their wrist, down towards the base of the tail, and follow that pattern through. It's sort of vaguely an M like you get in the prions, and you have this really nice contrasting pale mantle. Just looking at the underside, dark underwing, like I said, that distinct collar separating chin and breast. But beware, there are dark forms of soft plumage petrel. So dark morph, just compare that, the dark morph softy on the left to Peter Ryan's photograph of Cody Cougar petrel on the right. A species that was hugely exciting for a lot of people on the flock to see yet again was white-headed petrel. Again, another typical pterodroma, typical gadfly petrel. The overall impression you get on this bird, the jizz, is it's a very clean-looking bird. Quite crisp, white head, white underparts, the contrasting with those really dark underwings. Have a look on the upside. We're starting to get that pale mantle contrasting with the dark wings and whitish tail. The white head is obviously a good feature as well. That dark eye patch as well is a good feature. And if you are worried about the quality of photographs, you are going to be getting Uh, my good friend and colleague Mike Buckham took this the from the boat on the flock to sea yet again, to give you an idea of what you can achieve. It's not all going to be little blurs at a million miles away. This is how good they can get when they do get close. Again, with this white-headed petrel, looking at that dark underwing and the lack of collar, that giving quite an impression of quite a crisp, clear bird with those large, dark eyes. One bird I'm personally hoping to see is Barrow's petrel. It's a mainly a tropical species. So when we're in those boring, warm tropical waters close to the KZN coast, this is one of the birds we should be on the lookout for. Again, in the genus Pterodroma, very typical gadfly petrel. And in terms of the gadflies we will encounter, it's the only one with the white underwing and that dark purple bars. So we can have a look at this beautiful photograph by Alperins. Got that beautiful bar basically running from sort of halfway between the shoulder and the wrist, all the way through to the start of the primary feathers. Just a quick look at the upper side. So contrasting dark cap, that nice white fronds, all good features for flowers. And a look at the underside. So again, that dark carpal line, and then these incomplete gray breast patches coming down, forming an incomplete collar. Southern Fulmar, again, one of my favorite birds for a winter pelagic out of Cape Town. Our chances of seeing them aren't all that great, but we never know what we're going to see when we're out at sea. So the main features of this, what I think is quite a handsome bird, distinctive gray and white plumage. From a distance, they can look quite white, quite bleached. And once we close a bit of ground on these fulmars, that pink and blue bill shows up really well. The flight quite buoyant. The quite an effortless flight pattern in these fulmars. Just a upper side view, so this sort of striking upper wing pattern, and that pink and blue bill showing quite well. And this photo of mine showing the white underwing as the bird runs along the surface. Okay, so hope everybody is still following along. So I'm just going to touch on the skuas and jaegers. We can take the sort of skuas and jaegers and divide them into essentially two groups. We got the stout skuas and we got the gracile jaegers. So by gracile, I mean quite lightly built, not as sort of muscular and quite imposing looking as the skuas. For those of you who are still awake and paying attention, you'll realize this is not on the menu for this, but I just want everybody to, most people would have seen kelp gull, and we can use this as a reference. So one of the species that can occur and can be a potential ID hazard. So I spoke earlier when I was dealing with Pintado about windows. So you can see kelp gull lacks a window in the wing, quite a gracile body, and we compare that to bronze skua, which is an absolute tank of a seabird. Very heavy build, very stout um, body plan, and distinctive white windows in the wing are very good feature. and that mottling and sort of white streaking above is also really, really good. So here we've got a photograph taken from pelagic off the Cape. You can see the skua with its wings open, showing those distinctive windows in the wings, the brown coverts underneath that could separate it from the potentially confusing dark form of South Polar skua, which isn't on the list, but it is something we probably should be on the lookout for as we travel down into the Southern Ocean. Yep. So Christina had warned us earlier about some of the potential LBJ pitfalls. So the jaegers, in my opinion, sort of fall into that. So the jaegers are three kleptoparasitic species, all northern hemisphere breeders. They will cross the equator and spend the austral summer, the southern summer, off our coasts, as well as other coasts around the world. When they are in breeding plumage, they all have these very extravagant breeding tail plumes that separate them from the skuas. But beware, they have a very complex series of breeding, non-breeding, adult, non-adult, dark and light morph plumages. And like I have written here, deserve their own workshop. And if you want an idea of how intricate and how involved separating these things are, this book, the cover of the book that I have there on the left, is 190 pages devoted to a literal handful of species. So again, if we see any birds at a distance that are potentially confusing, we grab photos, get into huddles, and work them from there. But I will just very briefly touch on the three jaegers. So the first one is Pomeran. So very large, heavily built jaeger, quite barrel-chested, very broad-winged, as you can see in this bird. Um, Very slight window. This picture, you can see the spoons. So each of the jaegers have a different breeding tail plume pattern. Pomeran has the spoons. You can see that nice barrel chest in this photograph. Um, Compare that to something like parasitic jaeger, which is the sort of medium size of the three jaegers. They tend to have the sort of overall feel of being quite angular, quite a pointy bird, particularly in this bird. So you can sort of start to see some of those very sharp little tail at the back there, small head, slender bill. Again, like I said in the previous slide, angular, pointed profile of the bird. And you'll see in some of the field guides, they'll talk about whether these jaegers have long or short hands. And what they basically are referring to is what does the outer part of the wing look like from the wrist to the tip of the outer primary. The smallest of the three jaegers will be long-tailed jaeger. It's a small bird. It's the size of a large tern. So when we get to, I think it's workshop 4, dealing with the terns like great crested swift tern, these long-tailed jaegers, especially once they've lost those tail plumes, will basically recall sort of a large dark tern. You can see in this bird, highly reduced, absent windows can be a good feature in some of these birds. Just look at the underside of this bird. Those reduced absent windows show quite well. They also tend to be quite short-billed with a long nail. If you recall to the start of this talk when I was dealing with the white chin and speckled petrels, you should know what a nail is by now. photograph of this bird. You can see the nail on the end. And that is the end of my spiel. So I think uh, when we sort of are dealing with these ID things, we mustn't lose sight of the bigger picture, the reason why we are going to be so fortunate to head out to Marion Island. Uh, the island is overrun by house mice, and the quicker the mice can go, a lot of the species that I have touched on, grey petrels, white chins, all of these other Hugolin petrels, all of the birds breeding on the islands that are being quite heavily predated by house mice stand a chance and can then grow. I think that my talk, and over to Christina for questions.
Thanks very much, Vince. That was a great overview of all the medium-sized birds. As you say, you could probably have more detailed workshops on each of the groups, but I think you've done a fantastic job at giving some people some pointers, and with the recording, people will be able to go back and re-listen and take notes, and then also study your field guides. Yeah, so you can see all the emojis coming through that people have enjoyed it. So
fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's a few questions coming in. So let's start with the first one, which touches on your last slide. It's not really an ID question, but we'll deal with it anyway. From Bruce, saying, any update on the problem with wandering albatrosses on Marion? And I assume that is in connection with the mice problem, although there are some recent developments that I'll touch on now. Yes, so Mouse-Free Marion, the Mouse-Free Marion project is still underway, and they have a huge sum of money to raise to be able to try and tackle the mouse problem on the island. And this voyage, some of the proceeds from this voyage will be going towards that project to help fund the program to eradicate the mice on Marion Island. But I can't remember exactly when the date is that they plan to get going, but they still have quite a sum of money to raise. Sorry, Vince, I took that one from you, but here's one for you again from Bruce, saying, I understand from previous attendees that jizz is critical and that noting the detail is almost impossible. What was your experience on the last few trips?
Yeah, it's I think sort of both are fairly important. Like I showed with some of the photos, like with white-headed petrel, sometimes the birds can be that close. And when we had Albatross Thursday off Marion Island, there were just so many birds that were coming by that you could start to pick up on some details and learn the general kind of feeling for the bird. I remember lots of participants were starting to get the feel of things like great-winged petrel. So a great-winged petrel would shoot through, and everybody would be able to call it just purely on the jizz of the bird. So yeah, probably a mix of both. It all really depends on what the conditions are like. Yeah, it's I guess we'll have to see on the day, I guess, would be the best answer for that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it depends on the conditions and the light and all of that. And I think the key is to have some of the features in your mind so that when you do see a bird, however briefly, you are able to make a good guess at what it is without necessarily needing to rely on the guide to call it out, although they will be there, of course. So Nicolette asks, could you perhaps make a suggestion on the type of camera and lens size that would work well for this voyage?
Yeah, I'm not the world's greatest photographer, but Uh, yeah, again, it really depends what was sort of happens on the day. But obviously, the sort of longer the lens, the better. Sort of 100 to 400, the sort of 500s would be fairly good. Just bear in mind that these birds are moving around quite a bit. Tripods would probably be quite useful, but I know the decks being cluttered with tripods was a um, bit of a sticking point on the last flock. So just sort of bear in mind that the use of tripods when it comes to uh, sort of bringing scopes and things, especially on the main viewing decks. If you are in your cabin, or if you're from some of the upper decks, where you won't have the big throngs of people, I think sort of tripods, longer lenses are probably at home there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've touched on a question from Mel as well, asking about whether
Mm.
scopes would be useful. So yeah, just a plea from everyone. Just if you do bring a scope and a tripod, please be considerate of the other passengers and their um, ability to be able to see past you while you're using your scope. Okay, so two questions around some species that you didn't cover and aren't on the
Yeah.
BirdLife South Africa list. So firstly from Kenneth saying, are we likely to see short-tailed shearwater? And what are the key features versus the sooty?
So short-tailed, I think there's a tiny handful of birds for short-tail, a few records for short-tailed shearwater in South African waters, and there are a handful. I'm not a huge expert sort of in them. The sort of the the whole sort of shearwater short-tailed again, I think would be again would warrant a few slides, but we're probably looking at I think short-tailed doesn't have that really silvery underwing, and I think there's sort of more of a collar, if a sort of upper neck collar, if memory serves. And then I'll just sort of go from there onto the one about tropical shearwater. Yeah, that was one I was thinking of adding. I know the tropicals caught us by surprise last time. They weren't on the previous lists. Probably is one we should probably think about adding to the list. Uh, the tropical would probably end up within that same group of the sort of small little black and white the white features. The main thing we'll be looking for in those tropical shearwaters, particularly if we get the dark vented race, that'll stick out quite nicely, and the sort of features around the face. But yeah, absolutely, that's something we should think about adding to the list. I hope John is listening and maybe get that updated. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Peter.
Yeah, I will mention it to John, John Kinghorn, who is kind of coordinating the guides and the species list. Um, I'll just quickly answer a question from Thomas and an anonymous attendee asking about whether we'll be able, how close we'll be able to get to Marion. As far as I know, we are still awaiting feedback from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment on this issue. We obviously, yeah, hope that we will, but we also want to do it in an environmentally responsible way. These islands are very, very sensitive, so we wouldn't want to put them at risk. So we will wait and see what the department says and obviously abide by their decision. And as soon as something has been decided, I'm sure that that will be communicated with all the passengers. Let's see, a question from Kaylee asking, in terms of photos for ID, which is better, on the water versus in flight?
A combination would be good. Usually, flight photos are quite good, particularly things like underwing. and some of the other features. When sometimes when the birds are sitting together quite huddled up, they can be maybe sort of a little bit trickier to identify. But flight photos are always good if you can manage them.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
just sorry, Christina, if I could
Yeah.
just sort of from the sort of market guides. We do have huge numbers of guides on. So if you do have some interesting back of camera photos,
Mm.
just find a guide. I think like last time, we're all going to be having our little day glow vests running around, even if we aren't guiding. So just find somebody with one of the guide jackets and just sort of ask if they could have a look at your back of cameras. And we think as a group, we'll be quite happy to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, as on the last trips, the guides will be having an evening meeting every evening to discuss any or discuss the bird scene and any tricky IDs and go over anything that might be slightly unusual. And there will be a bird list, I think, posted on a whiteboard at the BirdLife information desk on the ship. Yeah, so we will do our best to make sure that everyone is updated, although it is hard on a ship with 2,000 passengers, but yeah, we will do our best. So okay, so I'm going to address this question before we get any more questions coming in. I see from Santosh, Bruce, and Indris all asking about the avian flu outbreak that was reported on this morning. So that was what the original question was referring to. Yes, unfortunately, it according to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, it seems like there may be a few cases of avian flu on the island, potentially brought in by a skua. So this is obviously very worrying and could be potentially devastating to the seabirds on the island. We've seen what's happened with flu outbreaks in the Northern Hemisphere and as well as in South America, where unfortunately the death rates of seabirds and indeed seals has been, and sea lions, I think, has been quite high. So yeah, unfortunately, there's not that much that can be done about it. Unfortunately, well, it's not unfortunate or fortunate, but birds move around and so carry diseases with them when they go. So yeah, there isn't that much that can be done about it other than perhaps carcass management on the island. So this, yeah, it's probably too soon to make any pronouncements about this. We'll just have to wait and see how this issue unfolds. But obviously it is very worrying and yeah, devastating if it does take hold. Let's see. Question from Hans Erik Jensen saying, "Hi Vince, nice to see you again. Would you prefer the upper, middle, or lower decks for birding on the very big vessel?"
So if the layout, I assume the layout is going to be pretty much the same as the last one. So the two sort of large decks that run on the port and starboard side, I think worked really well last time, as
Mm-hmm.
well as the sort of front and the back. I think the sort of viewing from the upper deck probably wasn't that great most of the time, and also you're away from the guides. So those two long passageways down the other side for me was at least in my experience were winners, as were uh, the bow of the ship worked quite well as well if you're happy to stand there and get battered by the wind, but there were some good sightings to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that assessment. There's a question from Nicolette asking where we get the list, the species list. I've just posted that in the chat box. You should also have a newsletter email from the Flock to Marion team with that link. Quickly getting back to an ID question from Marie, saying asking the difference between jaeger, skua, and gull, because in Afrikaans they're all mews. So perhaps just touch on that again.
So it sort of, in the sort of broadly taxonomic sense of the gulls and the skua jaeger groups are in different families. So there is a little bit of a sort of a taxonomic difference, but they are fairly closely related. So the skuas are, I kind of think of um, like the massive Springbok rugby players of the gull world, so they all look really quite heavily built, those quite heavy bulls, and then the Jaegers tend to be sort of far more sort of gracile. But that's why I included that photograph of the juvenile kelp gull, because they can look quite similar. So yeah, just to touch on, yeah, taxonomically they are different, but since they are fairly closely related, have very similar lifestyles, they can start to look fairly similar.
Okay, thanks for that. Then Celeste asks if we could send the list of those books that you recommended. She'd like to order them. I will send out the recording, so you'll be able to catch that at the beginning, but when I send it out, I'll just put a list there so that it's there in the email for you. And then another question from Joan asking about the program of onboard lectures and workshops on the ship, when that will be available. As far as I know, that is still being finalized at the moment. So yeah, just keep an eye on your emails for the email from, it'll come from flock@birdlife.org.za, and you should get the newsletter, which will contain the list of lectures, and you'll be able to pre-book if that's what is decided. I'm unfortunately not involved in organizing those presentations, but I do know that they are busy finalizing the schedule at the moment. And it's going to be a packed schedule with 4 lectures a day, except on the first and last day, and then the days that will be around the islands, the lectures will be in the evenings, so that everyone can be out on the decks birding during the day. Yeah, that's all of our questions. So yeah, thanks everyone for asking questions and sticking around. I know we've gone a bit over time. And yeah, thanks very much to Vince for your time and expertise. I don't know if you have any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with everyone.
Yeah, I just again, yeah, thanks for attending, listening for me drone on about medium-sized birds for 45 plus minutes. Yeah, yeah, when you're on the boat, come over, say hi to me and the other presenters. Give us a bit of feedback as well. So be a bit of exchange experience sitting and staring at the webcam on your computer without any audience feedback. So come over, say hi. I think a few of the guys would appreciate you maybe sponsoring their barbel at the end of a long day out on the deck. So yeah, absolutely great. Thanks everyone. Yeah, support BirdLife South Africa, support Mastery Marion, do what you can. So all these beautiful birds we will be seeing on Flock will be around for years to come. I think that's my spiel. Thanks everyone.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much, Vince. And yeah, thanks very much for also reminding us that this is about conservation as well. And yeah, so thank you. And thanks to all our viewers for purchasing the tickets, which, as Vince mentioned, is going towards African penguin conservation, and for booking on Flock to Marion, which is also supporting the Mouse Free Marion program and BirdLife South Africa. So with that, we will let you all go. Thank you very much again, Vince, and we'll see you on the ship, if not before.
Yes, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.